Good afternoon. I'd like to open the Watertown Board of Adjustment Thursday, February 8th, 2018 meeting. Roll call, Joe.
Hanson.
Here.
Kays.
Here.
Stonebarger.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Stein. Here. Culhane.
Here.
Olson, Ford, and Dargis Johnson are absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, item number 1 is the approval of the December 21st, 2017 minutes. Do I have a motion?
So, second.
Mr. Kay's motion, Mr. Dowley's second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2, applicant 17841. Jill, you.
Okay. Andrea Lindberg is the owner applicant. The property address is 1020 Cherry Drive. The conditional use request, per section 21-14035, home occupations, applicant seeks approval to operate an unlicensed home bakery business from her primary residence located in the R1 single-family residential district, contingent upon compliance with Chapter 2170, Home Occupations and Standards, and specific rules governing individual conditional uses, including but not limited to Section 210202, 2B7A through H. In this case, an unlicensed home bakery is the making and selling of home baked goods, not a state-licensed commercial kitchen. Staff finds that home occupations is a listed conditional use for the R1 single-family residential district per 21-14035. The definition of a home occupation is any occupation which is clearly secondary to the main use of the premises as a dwelling and does not change the character thereof or have any exterior evidence of such secondary use other than a non-illuminated sign not exceeding 400 square inches in area. This occupation shall be carried on or conducted only by members of a family residing in the dwelling. The applicant submitted a site plan which reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. Section 210202, 2B7A through H are specific rules governing individual conditional uses, and it requires the board's consideration of ingress-egress to the property, off-street parking and loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility with the area. You can see the site plan and written request for details on that. Chapter 2170, Home Occupations and Standards. Lindbergh proposes to utilize approximately 619 square feet or 19% of the 3,285 square foot single-family dwelling for her home baked goods business. She has signed her assurance to comply with Chapter 2170, and no specific signage is proposed at this time. Chapter 2163 is off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards. Sufficient area exists for 3 legal off-street parking spaces. To be counted as a legal off-street parking space, it must meet the minimum size and location standards and allow the exit of a vehicle without moving another vehicle. And a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces are required just for the single-family dwelling, and this board may require more as a condition of secondary uses, such as home occupations. Chapter 2165 is outside storage and display requirements for specific uses. The Ordinance 2165 is superseded by Section 217002, the Home Occupation Standards. Number 2 is no outdoor storage of equipment or materials used in the home occupation shall be permitted. And number 6 is no public display of goods shall be allowed on the premises except inside the principal building. There doesn't seem to be any issue with these things. Chapter 2173 is landscape and lighting standards. The minimum number of trees to be located on the development site shall be 1 tree per 50 feet of frontage. There are no trees planted in the boulevard or front yard at this time. And Titles 5, 1821 is sidewalk, trail, curb, and gutter requirements, and the property is compliant. This board must determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning 210202, 2B7A through H, in the chapters and titles described above. This parcel lacks minimum boulevard tree requirements from which the property has never been granted variances. If generally endorsed, the board may consider conditions of approval such as fulfillment of any or all lacking boulevard requirements, additional parking spaces, and or any other conditions the board deems necessary.
How wide is the frontage on the property?
This frontage is 91.18 feet.
Okay. Any other questions for Jill?
Are there any other trees planted in the boulevard up and down the street?
I believe there are.
Looks like that circle's one.
Oops, too far. Again, this is the parcel here. I believe there are some trees. This is hard to see on here because they're not leafed out and they're younger trees. But I believe there are some down here. And the applicant,
I drive that area quite often. There is intermittent trees up and down that Boulevard Street on both sides, so.
yeah, right through here.
Has the staff received any comments from adjoining property owners?
No.
Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak before or against, please come up, state your name, and address the board. Is Andrea here? Yes. Would you please come up?
Andrea Lindberg.
I have a couple questions. First off, it says only non-temperature controlled baked goods and candies may be produced. What's non-temperature controlled baked goods?
It just means it must be kept at room temp. I can't make cheesecakes or truffle stuff that requires refrigeration. So cupcakes, cakes, that kind of
Cookies?
thing. Cookies.
Okay. And if you're unlicensed home bakery, is there any inspection from the Board of Health or no inspection or?
No.
Okay.
They just make me have a limitation on my sales. And once I want to go over the $5,000 of sales, then I'm required to install a commercial kitchen that's separate from my home kitchen.
And you have no intention of getting to that level?
No.
Are you presently operating the bakery in your home?
I did start in December, not realizing that this was a requirement. I had, spoke with numerous entities prior to establishing my bakery, but I did do some sales, yes, in December.
Have your neighbors had any problems or issues with?
No.
Do you commonly see business coming in at 9 o'clock at night?
No. I really see that being very rare.
Do you have any objections to planting a tree in your boulevard?
No, we didn't know that was a requirement. We've actually talked about doing it, so no objection.
So to understand correctly, you started the business, then discovered that you needed a variance, and then stopped doing business. You're pending
Yes.
board approval.
Yep.
I would make a motion to approve.
Just any other questions for Andy? I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I would make a motion to approve subject to the planting a minimum of 1 tree per 50 foot of frontage.
So there's 91 feet, so you're talking about one tree.
1 tree.
Okay.
We're going to do a time frame in which to plant the tree?
This summer or this fall, before the end of the year, whatever better time to plant.
Motion by Mr. Case. Do I have a
Second.
second? Second by Mr. Dowd. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3, 17842. Jill?
All right. The owner applicant is Pat Shriver. This is 1505 through 1521 9th Avenue Southeast, kind of commonly known as Shriver Square. The conditional use request is pursuant to zoning ordinance section 21-28033, bar or tavern, applicant seeks conditional use approval for this premises located in the C3 Highway Commercial District to be eligible for alcoholic beverage license, which may include video lottery, contingent upon compliance with section 2.0102 location, specific rules governing individual conditional uses, including but not limited to 21-0202, 2B7A through H, and any other ordinance regulations that may apply. Staff finds that bar tavern is a listed conditional use for the C3 Highway Commercial District per 21-28-033. The definition of bar or tavern is any establishment, including restaurants and gambling establishments, licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption upon the premises where sold or provided. The term bar or tavern shall also include establishments licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. The applicant submitted a site plan which reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. Section 21-0202, 2B7A through H are specific rules governing individual conditional uses. This requires the board consideration of ingress and egress, off-street parking and loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility with the area. These points were not particularly addressed on the site plan. Maybe I can bring that up. This, of course, is different than the previous one being a commercial lot. 2.0102 is location, and this no longer applies to the C3 zone as of some fairly recent ordinance revisions, so we don't have to talk about that. Chapter 2163 is off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards. Again, you can see the submitted site plan. The dimensions were not specified for the aisles and parking spaces, but sufficient area address is available according to the building official. And Chapter 2165, outside storage and display requirements for specific uses. The application did not address outside storage. I don't believe there really is any there. Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards. This property lacks required boulevard, grass, tree improvements, as the parking lot is blacktop to the curb, where approximately 20 off-street parking spaces are defined or striped. And dumpsters are not screened. They are located behind the building, but they are not screened. Titles 5, 18, 21, and 24, sidewalk, trail, curb, gutter, and subdivision of land. The property is lacking in required well-defined safe infrastructure sidewalk, as the parking lot is blacktop to the curb. And this board must determine in the end if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning Section 21-0202, 2B7A through H, and the chapters and titles described above previously. This parcel lacks minimum boulevard and infrastructure, grass, trees, sidewalk, trail requirements. If generally endorsed, this board may consider conditions of approval such as fulfillment of any or all lacking boulevard infrastructure requirements, waiver of right to protest, development lot agreement limiting the scope of approval, for example, the building only or including the parking lot, etc., for the consumption of alcoholic beverages, and or any other conditions the board deems necessary.
So this is conditional use for alcohol in that area. And recently, not too long ago, we changed conditional use that if it was not utilized within a 12-month period, it lapsed. Is that correct?
This is correct. Actually, that stipulation has always been there. It was just clarified about the 1 year. If for some reason your conditional use stops and you don't operate that conditional use for 1 year, it is then terminated.
So if we were to grant this conditional use, currently there is one establishment there serving alcohol in that building complex. If that establishment was not there for 12 months, this conditional use would also go away? Is that the way
That's correct.
So there would have to be at least one establishment in this complex that would be serving alcohol to keep this in effect?
Yes, I believe so.
And the request as made is for the entire property, not the building specifically?
That request has not specifically been made, but it's up to you. That's what we have been doing on a regular basis, is kind of considering the whole area in case they want to do some kind of an event or something. Is it appropriate for that? And if so, you can deem the entire property as an okay approved site, and if not, you can just say limited to the building.
This area has been, it basically had an active liquor license on it since the 1970s when I was a bouncer at the Red Baron, And Stanton's opinion in the past is whenever someplace had it, they just be kind of grandfathered in or whatever, but we've asked Pat and he's agreed to come in to try to make this book worthy legal. And with the conditions that he knows if the liquor license ever goes away for more than 12 months. But what this will allow to do if he's got an Italian restaurant here and they go out of business and a Mexican restaurant wants to come in 2 doors down, they can do it without having to come back before the board. Because all we're doing is blessing the ground, says, yes, this ground meets all the requirements to have our liquor license on it.
Or
They still got to go to city council for the approval and the transfer license and everything else.
so if Pat wanted to start selling beer out of Shriver's Insurance, he could do that too.
If Pat wants to start selling beer to Shriver's Insurance, and if they're cheap beers, maybe we'll stop in.
Just checking.
So is that what happened? There was a lapse in,
No, if I can
No.
just clarify what kind of happened here is we started getting some inquiry by the restaurant, the Italian restaurant that's in there now. And then we got to thinking, well, why don't we just have Pat kind of get the whole area approved? Because, several of these spaces could want to, could be restaurants or, wanting to sell alcohol. So we just thought, well, if he comes in and gets the whole, whether it's the building or the grounds too, as long as there's one space on that property, he doesn't have to come back to this board, but anybody getting an alcoholic beverage license would have to go to the city council to get their specific unit.
okay, so then with respect to the restaurants or the places that are presently selling alcoholic beverages, there's never been an issue with that. It's trying to expand it to the rest of the building, basically.
Without having to come back to this board every time.
Right.
As far as the once the new Highway 212 project moves forward in a couple years, how much actual boulevard space will there be on the north side of the road?
I have to defer that to Shane. I have no idea.
5 to 7 feet less.
That,
I'm going to say about 0.
I'm sure what they're planning on doing is adding a sidewalk along the highway
Right.
and matching into the asphalt. I don't think they plan on recreating any green
But
space.
my question is, from the curb line to the back of the sidewalk, that will be what will probably be the end of right-of-way on the north side. There will actually be no boulevard for grass or a tree.
Correct. In fact, I think the state, and I'm not sure on this corridor if they've identified every owner, but what they've been doing is acquiring additional right-of-way and/or easements to accommodate the sidewalk where they need it. And I can't say that this property needs to give up space for more right-of-way or not. That's a DOT question, but they are planning to install a sidewalk and they're acquiring right-of-way accordingly.
Mr. Shriver, do you know where the right-of-way line is on your property?
There's 6 feet.
So
I believe it's 6 feet out there right now.
Yeah, it looks right according to my
And
GIS
the rumor
measurement.
is that they want 6 more feet, but they'll negotiate with the landowners at that time. They've surveyed it, but that's all that we've heard so far.
does the city have a history of requiring planting of grass along 212 for these types of issues?
Not unless the entire parking lot's removed and redone, then we do.
And just a clarification on ordinance requirements of the boulevard. It is 15 foot of grass, whether or not that's public right-of-way boulevard or private space, private property.
But you have only applied that when he would rip up the entire parking lot.
I believe so, yeah.
Any other questions for Joe? Then I'll open the public hearing if anybody's here to speak for or against this conditional use. Mr. Shriver.
I'm Pat Shriver. If you have any questions, I can answer them. I recognize some of you.
So basically, the way it's working now is if anybody wants to have alcoholic beverage in your building, they have to come before this board individually and request it, and you're just trying to eliminate that step. They'll still have to go to the city council and get individual approval there, but this would just allow you to bypass this board and have it good for the entire building and property?
Correct. This property's had the east end of that building was the Red Baron Bar back in the 70s and 80s. There's been alcohol on the premises since 1972, as we can go as far back. Where the discrepancy was is the way we maintain and monitor our conditional use. No one could tell us if there's ever been a conditional use on the property or not, the way they're logged. So we just said, come in, let's get the conditional use. If I have an open space and I'm going to lease it to a restaurant, you don't want to go through the leasing process. People make commitments and find out that now you might not get a conditional use. Puts the landlord at a liability risk. So we just said, you can't ask me if I'd come in and just for the record get the conditional use. That way I've got a record that the property's got a conditional use and the city has a record that there's a conditional use. Normally, Jill said that it's noted on top of the building permits, but we went back and found 24 building permits that are pulled from realtors to landowners to tenants, and there wasn't really a very good system of logging conditional uses.
As far as does each individual tenant have their own garbage, or do you have a central receptacle?
There's one 6-yard dumpster. It's in you can see right about where that pointer's at. It's screened by my building, that storage, by 3 storage buildings is the screening. There's no residences with, you can see you've got Runnings, you've got 400-foot storage building, a 200-foot storage building.
Where's the Cenex dumpster?
Theirs is behind the car wash, right about where you bring your pointer down.
Does that have screening?
Right,
does that have screening?
No. It'd be pretty hard to screen back in there just because of when the snow and the wind blows.
Right.
If you had a fence up there, you can see how tight it is. Everything's 0 lot line back there. You start putting fences and screening up, and you're going to start stacking snow on your neighbor's property. It's hard for the snow removal pieces.
So is there a
to get in
requirement to screen it if is all this property C highway? So is there a provision to screen it from your adjacent?
No, there is no condition to screen it within what itself it is unless you guys dedicate that it's just going to be a
Okay.
public nuisance to the neighbor or something, then you declare it needs to be screened.
Right.
Is there an issue at all with respect to one of the idiosyncrasies of Mr. Shriver's property here is part of Cenex is actually on his property. If we grant a conditional use, beverage license for the property, does that include the part that Cenex is encroaching on?
The only encroachment that Cenex has right there, if you see, as you get near their canopy, you can see where there's a triangle of cement there. That's where the encroachment's at.
That's
That part of the encroachment, which has all been handled by easements and agreements for ingress and egress, is the area that triangle where her pointer is that goes up. Part of their car wash is on my property, and then that square, that triangle square that's a different color there, that's concrete, where mine is pavement, but we handled that back in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with respect to if we were going to make a motion, then should we again put that disclaimer on there that it doesn't include any of the
Adjacent landowner.
Yeah.
I mean, the legal description of my property is just what's highlighted in blue. And we haven't, we're not changing anything. We don't have a casino, we don't have a video lottery, we don't have a bar. There's a restaurant that's been there since 1994. The restaurant that went in 2010 and again in 2012, Stanton's opinion was because the property already had alcohol on it, it wasn't required to come before the board for conditional use. And that was the opinion of the attorney at that time. That was the opinion, I believe, of Foley also when he was before Stanton. But, so we're not changing anything. We're just trying to make sure that the property is correct.
Any other questions? With that, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve as requested.
Motion for Mr. Dowley. Is there a second?
I'd like to make a substitute motion. Substitute motion would be to approve as presented with no requirement for a sidewalk that's going to be constructed by the South Dakota Department of Transportation, and no requirement for grass or trees.
withdraw mine in second year.
So there's a motion by Mr. Kays, and it was seconded by Mr. Dowling. Correct?
Correct.
Any further discussion?
Point of clarification on my own motion and your second. Would this be for just the structure or for the structure and the parking lot?
My intention was the property.
Just the whole property?
Right.
Okay, I'm with that.
We clear? You got that clear, Jill?
Is this like a variance in effect, or are you just saying for the conditional use for this time, this conditional use, no sidewalk, no boulevard is required?
We are not requiring infrastructure improvements. We're just granting the conditional use.
Right.
Just a point of clarification.
Okay, and it is a site license, not a building. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your time, Mr. Schreiber. That covering our business, I need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Stein, and seconded by Mr. Culhane. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Ready, Brady? Okay.
Ready.
Okay. With that, I'd like to open the Thursday, February 8th, 2018 meeting of the Watertown City Plan Commission. Roll call, please.
Hanson,
Here.
Kays,
Here.
Stonebarger,
Here.
Dolly,
Here.
Stein, Culhane,
Here.
and Olson, and just Olson is absent.
Okay, with that, item number 1, I'd like to get approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Culhane, have a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dolly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2 is approval of the minutes of January 18th, 2018 meeting. Have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Kays,
Second.
second by Mr. Hanson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3, plat of the River Ridge Park Addition. Brandy?
So this plat was presented to you 2 meetings ago and then was postponed, the last time being postponed from the January 18th meeting. And since then, we have had contact with Mr. Hofteaser, who is the applicant and property owner for the area of River Ridge Park Addition, which was presented to dedicate the park requirement for his subdivision of River Ridge Estates. And here, I'll pull open the letter to rescind the plat. So on January 30th, Shane and I presented to the Park and Rec Board and informed them on where we were at with this dedication, and that he would be coming back with concepts of different locations after we had more discussion about infrastructure improvements, and maybe coming up with a more strategic location for the park.
So he's rescinding the plat. He will have to come before the board again with a new plat after it is,
Well, and
Pass.
actually, he'll have to come with a new preliminary plan.
okay?
Because so the new location will alter that. So that'll have to come back for approval by the Plan Commission before he can bring a plat back to Plan Commission and Council for approval.
It's just going to be coordinated with the Park and Rec before
Yep.
it comes to, okay?
Yep, so actually, prior to the preliminary plan being brought forth, we'd bring it to the Park and Rec Board for them to approve the location.
Okay. No actions by this board at this time then, right?
Matt, is there anything? Okay.
Any other questions?
The plat is rescinded.
Okay, item number 4, new business.
So we have 2 items for new business, and Jill will take over for the discussions of home occupations that we have talked about previously, just giving you an update on where we're at with that and kind of the language that that we'll be proposing.
At the board's direction, we were asked to come up with or start looking at drafting some changes to the home occupations ordinance. One of those changes was to basically eliminate home daycares from home occupations. And we have talked about removing them altogether and having them state registered, having to have state registration, and just taking it out of the city's hands and leaving it with the state.
When you say eliminate them, you mean eliminate them from coming before this board, not
Yes.
eliminating daycare?
From ordinance
Okay.
regulation.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
So you're saying that we should regulate, the state should regulate all daycares in the city of Watertown?
That's been one thought, yes.
So
But in order to do that, then you'd have to meet all state regulations, so I object to that.
there are several daycares in town that are not state registered daycares, and to register with the state, you do have to jump through more hoops. And unfortunately, we don't have enough daycare in the city currently, in my opinion.
Yeah, just-
And it would be detrimental, I think, to the daycare providers, so.
Just looking at the vast history of daycares that have come before this board in the past, the majority of them don't have state
Or less than a dozen.
registration, so.
I would recommend, if you're looking for direction, is just put what the minimum requirements are that you are, and we make them a permitted use subject to meeting those requirements, then they don't have to come see us. Such as the parking standards that we always have to have, such as a minimum square footage, some of those types of things. There's plenty of examples out there in other communities that have put together. I look at many home, and it's not just daycares. I look at most home occupations as an accessory use to the principal structure. It's not the main purpose, right? So why don't we look at a deeper dive on all of the home occupations and then pick those ones that we think have more of a potential negative impact in a neighborhood, that the neighbors would be more in tune to coming to a meeting to talk about, one. And those types of things, such as the woman's bakery right here that just came in, or the incidental 5, 6, 7 kid daycare, or some of those types of things where there's no potential nuisance other than maybe incidental traffic, and put that in the hands of staff, because I really don't know if it's really necessary that I need to know that maybe Liam decides to open up a legal practice at his house or an accounting service at his house, and as long as the traffic levels are this, that, and the other thing, and he doesn't have a big bright sign out there causing things, I'm not exactly sure what I care as long as we have some set standards and the standards are being met. That's my opinion.
I agree with that. You know, it's a kind of a fast track methodology then for them to go through.
The
Have we ever declined a daycare?
once.
Once, yep.
Was it obvious that?
It was a parking situation. No
Well, it
parking-
was a traffic situation too.
Traffic, yes. There was no parking to come off a busy street and load and unload the children. It was unsafe, and it was denied.
Okay.
We know if we were just to go back and take a look at a litany of the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the number of home occupation permits, we've tracked them. And we come up that there's 6 that are here every year that we've never denied, and then we've attached all the conditions that we've always conditioned. Why don't we just make that the standard, and then we don't have to see them? It's less work for us. It's a lot less work for you.
Well, and on the same, the second thing we were going to talk about was the very low impact type of home occupations, which would be basically, telemarketing, telecommuting, direct sales vendors, artists, hobbyists, your farmer trucker that does not bring a vehicle or anything home but just has his home office there and he works off site. These are things that we would take into an administrative type checklist and check off these things as yes, we can do this and all's good to go. And that's another thing that we were working on for other types of home occupations besides daycares.
I think that's a good direction to go. Just, you've heard our, comments on the state registered stuff. Also, too, in that vein, I noticed that when I was viewing the last 2 meetings that I've missed, so I didn't really miss out on all the stuff, that there was questions about variances and that have been came up through the last few years, and the frequency of certain variances that may trigger, maybe we should change an ordinance if we have a inordinate amount of the same type of variance requests. Can you go back, say, for the last 12 months and see how many side yard variances, how many, whatever variance, so we can kind of keep track on if there is some in the ordinance that needs to be changed or updated? So we can be on top of it.
You might want to go back more than 12 months. You might want to go back 2 or 3 years. It
I
won't
think
take that. It won't take that much to
Seeing as
pull
how
them
she works for you, that's fine.
Something like that, it'd be interesting to see exactly where in the city, if you chunked it off, because there's differences, from the lake to town, so.
That is true. And there has been talk in the past about making the lake a separate R1 district or whatever, so maybe that would be another issue.
Yes, we can certainly run up some kind of a report on that.
Thank you. Anything else on the home occupation? Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, yep, we'll bring you some sort of options for ideas, and it may be broad at first.
Sure.
And there may be, both kind of ways, and but we'll get it going.
Thanks.
And the next time you guys see it, hopefully we can have it as a draft ordinance amendment to keep that moving.
Yeah, the other thing too that we usually ask if there's been any, fire or police issues too, that would be on your criteria list. I would maybe suggest that.
Okay, and then we have the staff report and recommendation for Pheasant Lane.
Okay.
So we've been talking about Pheasant Lane since last March when we rezoned Pat Mahold's property to RG from R1. And so in October, staff was tasked with reaching out to property owners and I guess seeing what their appetite was for what they wanted to do with their property. And we sent out a letter on December 21st, and we have heard back from all of the landowners except for 3. And so we gave them 2 options. It was either if they were interested in improving Pheasant Lane to a certain standard, or to rezone their property from R1 to RG, just because we would assume they would require less utilities and there would be less traffic as far as where they would obtain access from. So we got all the property owners, 28% of them were in favor of rezoning to RG, and then 12% were interested in rezoning, or in an improvement to Pheasant Lane. So it was under 50%, which didn't really tell us a lot. But also, during that process, we had the surveying crew go out and stake different property pins and lay out where the right-of-way is within that area. And it's passable as far as the grading, but there are a lot of obstructions, and there's people's property within the right-of-way, that I think that, as far as a recommendation, would be something that I think that we should pursue to make sure that the right-of-way is unobstructed, and that the adjacent property owners would be required to remove those obstructions.
You're saying there's like trees in the right of way?
There's a lot of vegetation, and that makes it like they can't pass through. They would have to jog into private property, get back to North Lake Drive, and then go around. So if they could continuously pass through Pheasant Lane.
There's various encroachments of private property. There's probably campers, boat docks, things like that
But
erroneously get put. I won't say that they necessarily intentionally put them in the right of way, but because nothing's marked out there, they just put them where it's an open space, and unfortunately, a lot of times that's in the designated right of way.
trees and vegetation wouldn't be their responsibility
Some
to
of
maintain.
the vegetation is what I would say volunteer trees and obstructions that way, but there are some that are intentional plantings of trees too that would need to be relocated. So there's a variety of encroachment issues. We would just look to maybe get it all cleaned up so that we can kind of reestablish where Pheasant Lane is.
Is there any fencing that's encroaching on it?
Yes.
Yes, there is.
So you said you went out there and staked Pheasant Lane?
Yep.
So it should be clear where the right-of-way is, or,
Mm-hmm.
so the property owners can't say they don't understand where they should park their camper or their boat with.
Right, and since that, there have been some stakes that are removed, so, I mean, that will just be a matter of remeasuring. I know Doc Howard, who has the property on the north side, he has put a white electric fence, so it's very clear where the boundary is. So if anything, you could measure 60 foot off of that, because that's what the right-of-way is.
So is the staff going to direct the property owners to clean up their portion of their right-of-way?
If that's the direction that you guys would like us to.
I want to clarify, though. I mean, if they're volunteer trees, that's not their responsibility to.
Yeah, we wouldn't. We want to clear up all of the intentional encroachments. We'll
Right.
Put it
So
that way.
I have a question. If it's the right-of-way on their portion of the property, are they required to be cutting the grass and all that on it? Controlling the weeds?
Technically, yes, but we don't pursue that much when it's not in the developed portion of town where it is a higher standard of grooming. It is technically right away, but there's no complaints that we receive on that, and most of those issues like that are complaint driven. So we do clear up the complaint driven
So
issues.
it would be within our purview to remind the property owner they're responsible for that?
I find that I would argue that. I don't think it's the responsibility. If we're not applying that carte blanche across the city, I don't want to put it on Pheasant Lane either.
That you think, like, as far as the volunteer trees, that would be a park and rec job?
Yes.
How about the grass?
If I would say no, I say the grass, as long as it doesn't get hot taller than 6 or 18 inches, whatever your standards are for nuisance.
Most of those lots and everything over there are just left in the natural grass right now, so it's no different than any other part of it. If it all became developed and stuff like that, then that'd be an issue where we'd want to go in there and push it more.
Right. But if they've planted trees, or if they've got structures, or they have proper personal property that's sitting in that right of way, I would say yes, that would.
So even though we have an ordinance that grass over 8 inches high should be cut, or it will be cut by the city, we're not enforcing that?
I don't know.
Any of these lots is what
I
you're
don't
saying,
believe.
Ken?
I don't believe that applies to any boulevard in the city of Watertown. I don't think there's ever been a
It
history.
applies to any lot in Watertown.
I don't believe that the city has went out and made. It's a different situation if you're talking about a piece of property that is developed, where I have a structure on it, where there's an implied idea that you need to be maintaining it. But if you got a piece of ground where there is no road, there are no public improvements, it doesn't butt up to anything except a backyard of somebody's house or another piece of property, I don't find that the requirement should apply to them. That's just my opinion.
So Brandy, just if I understood you correctly, so that area is now zoned R1.
A majority of it.
Okay, and the majority of the owners that you heard from wanted to rezone to RG.
28% of them.
Okay.
28%.
Fair enough. Would the direction, whatever ends up going with the zoning, impact what you've done with the staking and the roads? That is to say that if it's rezoned as RG, would that have any impact on any of these issues with the trees and the volunteer trees and all that?
No.
No, the right of way is the right of way. I guess I'll skip ahead here a little bit, but the one thing we might want to consider is if the public were ever to choose to use the right of way as it is, volunteer trees, tall grass, that's one
I'm
thing.
with you.
But if somebody has a camper or a fence or planted a row of evergreen trees across it that disallows the public to use the right of way, that's probably the discussion that needs to be had from that aspect. And when I say skipping ahead, just to kind of simplify this, all this research that Brandy did with the property owners has really led to a non-consensus on how to address Pheasant Lane and access, and get the issuance of building permits is ultimately the goal. So I think with that, we've clearly not got a consensus where we're going to include multiple property owners. I think we need to step back now and probably look at Mr. Mahold's request on a individual basis, and then kind of apply it from our ordinance-driven view, which typically is an improved road and things like that. Now, the city is also in the process, and albeit nothing's been approved yet, but we are kind of looking at a set of engineering standards that we're proposing in the future to bring into the community. I think we would probably try to look at that and see how that would address this situation too. And ultimately, what I would like to do is come up with a couple possible options and discuss those with Mr. Mahold, and we'll vet this through staff to make sure that we're comfortable with how that goes, and then bring that back to this board for another open discussion. And if we follow every portion of the ordinance, it does require to have a developed road with pavement, curb and gutter, utilities, all that. And I don't think that's probably where this will land, but we certainly need to recognize that it's important to indoctrinate that those improvements are expected at some point in the lifetime of Pheasant Lane. And so we have to respect both where we're at today and where we need to be, 20, 30 years from now. So that's where we got to go, and that's what I think will come out of this.
Brandy, I have one more question. You said there was 3 property owners that did not respond. What percentage of Pheasant Lane do they occupy? Do you know?
Let me pull that up. Not off the top of my head.
I mean, is it significant, or is it minor, or?
It was minor because I did get a hold of Doc Howard, who owns 40% of the property out there, and he is not interested in the two options.
So, do we have a general time frame? I don't want to opinion anything, but I know we've been told by city council members, we've been told by property owners that this has been in play for nearly, it'll be a year in May. And do we need to extend it out much longer than that?
Well, my goal would be, I mean, we've put in a lot of work on this
I know you have.
issue, and we'll put in whatever it takes to get us moving forward, and I don't want to make any commitments, but I mean, ultimately, one reality could be that going forward means we do nothing, but I don't think that that's where I want it to land,
Right.
but
Pheasant
I
Lane
want
was plotted 40 years ago,
Yeah,
and the city's been kind of kicking the can down the road
That's
for
exactly
a long
right.
time. I'd like to see something come up so that if Mr. Mahol wants to develop that property and obtain a building permit, we work with him to come up with something that you can bring this board, so
That's
the
my
board can
intention
decide
as well.
whether that's palatable or not.
Yep.
So we need to establish like a design standard that is appropriate for this area, which at times we had talked about a gravel street section, the rural street section,
Yep.
and having ditches. And in the design standards, that is allowed within city limits, and there are specifications for it. That might be an option where it would be written into like an access agreement where they have to improve that right-of-way to the extent of their property lines. And then also, say Pat would develop his property right here. And then this property owner down the road came and they wanted to build a garage, but they would need a public road improvement in front of their property as well to get the building permit. So then they would have to extend where Pat left off down to their property. So then when this person comes along, then there would be a cost recovery calculated where they knew what they had to pay back.
Mm-hmm.
And if the city would convey that to the property owners, I don't know how that would all work. That would be
But then you
a
can,
lot of overhead. But
then you maybe would then look at it as a percentage of it, either in regions or the whole stretch would then trip the trigger for a pavement.
Correct. Yeah, yep, and that's what I say. We have to make sure that we tie it to improving it ultimately going
To city
forward.
standards,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
We will try to reformulate that idea and come up with some concepts as soon as we can.
Thank you, Brandy. I have one other question for you or for Shane. Are there any other issues that need to be resolved before the current construction season starts on this or any other thing that may be starting this summer? Do you know of any construction these people always say, well, they'll come in June and want something approved by July, or do you know anything on the burner that's?
we are still working towards the resort subcommittee and looking at that in the R1 ordinance to see if we can put that in as a use, and that would be something that I think people would want to utilize this summer in the building season if that were an option. And that committee is formed, and I sent out a poll yesterday to see availability, and then if we'll get a meeting together it's looking like beginning of next week.
When do you think this board will see anything like that?
What's that?
When do you think the planning commission will be able to see anything like that?
Well, I'm hoping it won't take a lot of meetings. So if we'd shoot, I know before when it was initiated, we wanted to form the subcommittee by January, so we're a little behind that. But I mean, if we could meet 3 times and get something put in and brought forward, I think the sooner the better, for sure.
Okay, because we always get fingers pointed at us that we're the
Right.
ones that are holding up the process. I just want to make sure we're trying to push this along as quickly as we can.
At this time, there's a poll out there for people to commit to a time for that first meeting, and that'll be, the first meeting will tell us a lot on how deep into that process the discussion wants to go. So
Okay, thank you.
What about any more talks on signs and sign code that we had over 6 weeks ago? I'm not saying that we need to do it, but I'm just saying there was talks at that time about reviewing standards.
Yeah, we have recently presented again with a delegation from the realtors, and they have another proposed thing, so you probably can expect to see within the next meeting or two another proposal within the sign code for realtor signs and stuff. So,
Okay. Is there any other old business?
Well, just to go back to Pheasant Lane for a minute.
Okay.
Just a minute. But as far as
Try and-
Pat, then letting him know where we're at with it, I guess, do we say if you want, right now where it would be an ordinance, if he'd want to get a building permit tomorrow, he would have to assure that he would improve the road to city standards to the full extent. And obviously then he would not be in favor of that, so then he'd come forth with like a variance. And I don't know if that's a way that then we can at least inform him of where we're at with it. I really wish we could.
No, we'll
tie it up.
we'll work with Mr. Mahold, find out what options are viable. If they don't, if it's anything that doesn't follow the rights that our office have to issue, will definitely be brought before the planning commission and probably ultimately the city council, because we don't have the authority to bypass the ordinances. We have to run that through the process and come out accordingly. So that would be our intention. But we'll have to first roll up our sleeves and hopefully come to some terms with Mr. Mahold on how far the city can be flexible or not, and then come forward.
Well, and that's why I'm saying we could inform him of what the,
We will.
so then he has somewhere to go forward.
Right. If he didn't hear this or isn't watching this, we'll certainly reach out to him and tell him what the intentions are coming out of this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And any other old business?
Nope,
Any need for executive session?
nope.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Stein makes a motion, Mr. Dowey seconds it. All in favor say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.